Okay, that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
Yeah, no. Keep on.
But then when he talked about quenching the desire, he kind of screwed it up. Like, I like the fact that the love is lifting you higher and higher, but it doesn't quench your desire. And that's he should recognize what he's doing, unless he's just trying to be more paradoxical.
Well, I think I think what he means. And this is Jackie Wilson. I think what Jackie meant was that it quenches your desire in the unquenchableness of it.
In fact, that's what Gregory says. What he says. How does he put it here? He says that God didn't go back on his promise of his promise did not prove false. Yeah. Right?
I love it because you'd think oh, this is great, but that means God said something false.
No, but his promise did not prove false. That he would see him, right? But he does very specifically say, but he did not promise any cessation or satiety of the desire. So I think Jackie. I think Jackie's probably remembering when he read Gregory of Nyssa from when he was a lot younger.
Yeah, he forgot the wording.
He should have reviewed it before he wrote the song.
And I love it. Keep it climbing higher and higher, step above.
Oh yeah, man. But that's getting ahead of ourselves here.
No, I was talking about Jackie. I mean, he's almost quoting him.
Yeah, I know he is. He is almost quoting him. There's always a step above. Actually, I mean, maybe we just want to move right there, right? So, let's. But before we start that,
you have to start at the base of the mountain.
Well, no, we already got past that, right? We did that last. But I think okay, we got to talk about this. This blew my mind. Okay, this is on page 98, right when we start the heavenly tabernacle here. When he he basically says Christ is the heavenly tabernacle.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
But the way he explains it is what I feel like I've been moving towards this for years now. And I just needed some real confirmation in someone that I really trust that what I say lots of times in class is actually true.
You always wonder.
But when I see St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the 3 Cappadocian fathers, say this, then I feel better about myself, right? And this is paragraph 174. I think it's wait. No, it's not paragraph 1. Yeah, yes, it is. It is.
It's the one where I wrote yes in the margin.
Yes, I wrote lots of stuff in the margin here. Okay, so let's just read it here. Taking a hint from what has been said by Paul, who partially uncovered the mystery of these things, we say that Moses was earlier instructed by a type in the mystery of the tabernacle, which encompasses the universe. All right, that's a great phrase right there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This tabernacle would be Christ, who is the power and the wisdom of God, who in his own nature was not made with hands, yet capable of being made when it became necessary for this tabernacle to be erected among us. Thus, the same tabernacle is, in a way, both unfashioned and fashioned, uncreated in preexistence, but created in having received this material composition. So there's 2 things going on here, right? Christ is the heavenly tabernacle, not made with human hands. And yet he's also the earthly tabernacle because he is made by human hands in the incarnation. But I think I think that's an amazing point that you could talk about a lot. But I think even more than that is that he encompasses the universe. So that if we talk about Jesus Christ, I mean, to me, this is the destruction of all sort of reductive, mechanistic, instrumental understandings of Jesus Christ as the salvation of the world or something like that.
Right.
I think what's happening here is there's a recognition that Jesus Christ in a real sense, is reality, right? And he says it again on the next paragraph near the bottom. It says that this mystery of our faith, that it might bring that which it had left reality back again to reality. This is the only begotten God who encompasses everything in himself, but who also pitched his own tabernacle among us, which is exactly the language of John 1:14.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then in 177, he goes on. Not page, sorry, paragraph.
Oh yeah, paragraph. Yeah.
For the power which encompasses the universe, in which lives the fullness of divinity, the common protector of all, who encompasses everything within himself, is rightly called tabernacle.
Yeah.
And this is he doesn't mention the in you we live and move and have our being.
I think he did earlier, but not in this context.
Yes, because when I read this, I was thinking Augustine. I was thinking this is just like Augustine. But I think that's a beautiful image that you have the tabernacle of all of material reality, which itself is present within it. Right? And this is an incredible paradox that you have the tabernacle have within it itself.
Yeah, right? Yeah. It's and this is why Christianity just isn't a religion among religions, right? You can't say that this is just our way of looking at the world, and we put our hope in this one dude, just like the Buddhists put their hope in Buddha, not in the same way, right? But whatever, right? But really, this is really radical. What I'm saying is everything that's true about anyone ever, about any historical context of all time, exists within Jesus Christ. That he is the universe. And this is Beirut. For those of you who were in Rich's or his French mysticism. Yeah. Whatever, I forget what it was called.
French school. Yeah.
His French school class, where you guys read a lot of Beirut. I remember de Lubac quoting Beirut, saying that Jesus Christ is a universe. Yeah. And I think what we really want to say is he's the universe, right? So not in a monistic pantheistic way, right. but in some mysterious ontological way, that it's not just Jesus is the most important thing that ever existed, but Jesus is existence that became a particular, and that this is. Yeah. I mean, this is even more paradoxical in some sense than God becoming man, is that everything became a man. Yeah. Right? Even other men became this one man, right? But I think this also kind of goes to the anthropology of Nyssa, which in one sense gets expanded into an entire ontology. Right. So it's not just all of man that's one atom, but it's all of everything that's one atom.
Yeah, and that I think corresponds to what we were talking about last podcast that I was looking up. I thought it was in Ephesians that it was part of the divine plan to bring all things like to him, through him, into perfection. Yeah. So that you have all of reality being found in Jesus Christ. So then if you want to understand the cosmos, you turn to Christ. Right. I mean, this is. I mean, not in the sense that it's like in contrast. You want to understand this stuff, so you have to turn to something else.
Right. No. Yeah.
But it's not. You ignore this stuff and you then turn to Christ because it turns out there's still like perfect distinctness between the whatever it is the your grandmother that you're trying to understand. Right. She's fully understood by knowing Jesus Christ. And so you have this like really, and not just because you forget her and now you're just worried about Christ who is all things, but all things become their own reality by knowing Christ.
And because they're their own reality in this sort of perichoretic dancing within each other, abiding within each other reality. I mean, in some sense, it seems like Plotinus on steroids. It's like the beauty of the thing itself is the seeing of the one, but really, there's some sort of a deeper ontological identity of some kind happening here, in a Christological understanding of all things. Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is I mean if you really want to read some other stuff about this, David Schindler's introduction to de Lubac's Mystery of the Supernatural, where he questions de Lubac in sort of making humanity unique in its openness to the divine instead of all things. I think in some sense the encompassing of everything within Christ points to Schindler's point, that everything is within him and everything is fulfilled in him. And man has a special sort of priestly / consuming in a non-bad way, right? But like eating all things in a Shmemenian way. Taking all things into himself that it might be ultimately brought to its fullness in Jesus Christ, who takes all things into himself because they're already there, right? It's always this already not yet or always already kind of reality, right?
Yeah, man's kind of the shepherd of created being.
Yeah, but he's shepherding him. He's shepherding it into himself, who is the sheepfold.
Yeah, he's the
who
sheep.
then himself moves into the true sheepfold, which is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Right, man.
So that there's actually no distinction. Then I mean, there's distinction, but there's no
separation.
Separation.
Yeah.
Between the flock and the shepherd.
Right.
The head and the body.
Right, which is why, and he says this also in the earthly tabernacle when he identifies the earthly tabernacle as the church. This is on page 101, paragraph 184, right at the beginning of that section. Whenever the prophet looks at the tabernacle above, he sees the heavenly realities through these symbols. But if one should look at the tabernacle below, and here he says, since in many places the church is also called Christ by Paul, it would be well to regard the name apostles, teachers, blah, 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 blah. But that parenthetical notion there of the church being called Christ. Pius XII's encyclical on the mystical body of Christ, Mystica Corporis Christi, makes this point as well, where he says that the church or Christians, I think he's talking about the church actually, the church is called another Christ, and sometimes just simply Christ. Yeah. So, and I think the reason that you can call it another Christ and also Christ, or even the bride of Christ, or, people ask me this all the time, how can the church be the bride of Christ and the body of Christ, right? That doesn't make any sense. And I always say it makes sense because what you're trying to do is is somehow F the ineffable. Yeah. You're trying to F the ineffable. That sounds great. But you're trying to express the mystery of Trinitarian perichoretic indwelling. And whatever it means that there's one God and there are three persons, you're trying to express that because we're being taken up into that, into the same. Yeah. I mean, into the same reality. Right? I mean, that's really I think that's what divinization is all about. No comment, Jacob.
I know. I mean, there's too much to comment. Yeah,
which is and I kind of think it goes along the lines of his own sort of negative theology, that when we try to express things, we're always going to talk in contraries, and we're going to affirm both, because that's what a paradox is. But it's not saying that contraries are true. It's just saying that neither of these actually applies to the reality, because nothing applies to the reality that I can image.
Well, it applies in some sense, maybe. But but it doesn't. It doesn't.
It's always more than that.
Circumscribe.
Yeah, it's always more than that.
Delineate.
It's more unlike it than it's like it.
Yeah,
in the great phrase of Lateran 4, right?
So this also made me think that really puzzling passage. I think it's in Paul that we're making up for the suffering. Mm-hmm. Was it the sufferings lacking in Christ?
Yep. Colossians,
where and I think you have a way to understand that in light of this, because when you realize that the church isn't exactly a separate reality from Christ, that the sufferings lacking in Christ are, it's not like, oh, we're then like we're sharing in a suffering that's not Christ's suffering,
right?
But rather this is a temporal extension of the crucifixion, temporal extension of the agony in the garden, right? This is the temporal extension of the life of Christ, so that it's a lacking only to the extent that Christ hasn't lived out the suffering of the Communist Party.
Or how about this? Maybe he has, and it happened in the Triduum, and that if we think all of creation, if Christ is, in a sense, all of creation, and he's subsumed into this one particular, then why could we not also say that this is just another mode of the living out of the suffering that Christ himself suffered, right? Because in a sense, his suffering is, I want to think of it as like, gosh, we are so technological, as the zipped suffering of the world, right?
The compressed file.
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, Oliver Crisp would love to hear this, right?
Yeah.
But he what he has done is everything, and so what we are living has already, in some sense, been lived in him, in the mystery of his particular life, so that I'm coming up at this right now. So, but it's making sense to me. Instead of thinking that like Christ has this really, really long life, which we normally think, right? He died, he rose, he ascended, and at least this is how I normally think of it. Not everybody normally thinks. And he's living the life of the church now. But that I would that I would take like my suffering today when I had to wake up when my alarm went off, as somehow Christ suffering more after his crucifixion. But now I'm starting to wonder if we think of it in this sort of Christological way that we understand the encompassment of everything himself becomes a particular. Then I would want to say something like me waking up in my alarm today is in some way is like, I don't know, one of the drops of blood from his agony in the garden, right? And I don't want to sound like over pietistic here. It's only over pietistic if we're not talking ontologically, I think. But I'm saying metaphysically, it's identical with that, right?
So one way to think of it is not simply that you have Christ's life expanding out temporally, but rather you have temporality being subsumed. What would be the word? Being the opposite of expansion, contracted into Christ's life, so that really history. We tend to think of history as moving out, but maybe actually history is moving in.
Yeah, or that history is. This is a really weird image, but I saw a movie once when I was a little kid. I don't even remember what the movie was. Perhaps it was. This is a guess. Perhaps it was the Don Knotts movie. You know the Don.
Oh, I know all the Don Knotts movies.
The Don Knotts movie where he becomes a fish in World War II.
Oh yeah.
What's that called? Whatever it is.
I forget. Yeah.
Anyway,
I know what you're talking about.
It might be that movie because I remember it was a cartoon, and I remember it was underwater. So this is the only reason I'm thinking this. And I remember it was old, like 50s. But there was this can of like seafood, and then there was a picture on the label of the can of a fish holding a can of seafood, the same can, and on that can was a picture of a fish holding a can of seafood, and there was this like movement that happened with the movie where it like went into the picture and into the next picture, and it was like this like diving in, and so I wonder if like what we're living now, I don't know if this helps at all, this analogy, but I wonder if what we're living now just is that thing there, that smaller can that has already been lived out within, in some sense it's within another can, a bigger can, right? Within the world. Yeah. But at the same time, it just is the world.
So you have like history, you can talk about history on different levels.
Yeah.
Right? Or history or narrative or story on different levels. And Nyssa's playing on this all over the place, or playing with this all over the place in his works, that you have the narrative of salvation history played out in the narrative of an individual life, which is really the narrative of Christ himself.
Right.
And so I think just the idea of a story being itself a part of a story, a broader story, but itself communicating this
the whole story in some sense.
Yeah.
Except that the unique thing about Christ is that his living of the story wasn't just a communication of the story, but it just is it, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe this is really radical, but I wonder if we've already jumped that ship, right?
What's radical? What's radical at this point?
Yeah. But I wonder if. Now, I actually think this is completely true right now. But maybe I'll decide differently in a week. But I wonder if looking at Christ's life and seeing what happened to him, I can actually say this is the world, and I can say I have confidence that at the end of the world, it will not be the end, because I already saw the end of the world.
Yeah.
It was called Good Friday.
Yeah.
And
Right.
guess what happened after that?
Yeah.
Life, real life.
Yeah.
And what
Yeah.
Ratzinger points out, and actually a footnote in here pointed it out. Oh, I was so glad for all you Ratzinger fans out there, especially my interesteds. Footnote 145 on page 172. I don't even remember where this corresponds to in the text itself. But he says, in this passage, bios is earthly life, and zoe is spiritual life,
Yeah.
a common distinction, but not consistently observed in Gregory. This is a big point that Ratzinger makes as an introduction to Christianity. He says bios is transcended into zoe. And so what I want to say about sort of the world and the eschaton, and it's interesting now that I think about the word eschatology, especially as Schmemann uses it. It seems to be saying maybe something along these lines, although I'm not sure if he would have put it in this language. But if I look at Christ and I see the end of the world happening at the crucifixion, and then I see the resurrection, it's not just that there will be life after that, but that there will be zoe, not bios, right? Because bios is just the unglorified life, and in a sense, it's a, like, to use Clark's language, it's a limited participation in what life is.
Yeah.
But zoe is this expansion of life into a transcending of itself, a theosis, a divinization that takes place. So that not only can I look at Christ and say, oh, I have hope that the end really isn't the end, but I can say I have hope that actually zoe will be the ultimate.
Right. But what does zoe look like is a difficult thing to...
Right, which of course comes into play in the apparitions of Christ, not even recognizing him, but also his having this mastery over his own existence and creation in some weird way. But I think if it's really true that he contains the entire universe in himself, and if I really, really am serious and don't reify the human nature of Christ, but say no, that's just him. Then I have to say that just is the universe in a real sense. Yeah. And that is how the universe, I've already seen the history of the universe play out, and we are the expansion of that.
Right. Yeah. So rather than thinking of the life of Christ as an event in history, it is all of history.
It's the event of history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And history is a retelling of that life, a retelling of that history.
Yeah, and you could even flip that and say maybe history isn't a retelling of that history, but maybe what happened there was the telling of history, and what's happening here is actually, in a sense, within that, right? Instead of thinking as history as our life as being the bigger thing, maybe we're actually the smaller can of food, of tuna.
The label in the label.
Yeah, the label in the label. That we are actually, we think what we're doing is living, in a sense, our reality, and that Christ was sort of this microcosm of reality, but maybe we're actually the microcosm of Christ's life.
Yeah.
Which is radical to think about, but I've been obsessed with this idea of Christ and being the Logos, and the Logos being in a sense the encompassment of the universe, just what it is. Because it seems like that's what the ancients understood that word to mean, whereas we don't. Right? We sort of concentrate on on other aspects of it, the reasonability, or being reason itself, as if that's a thing. Maybe that's a reification, or even communication coming from another to another, right? Which is really important too. But I wonder if we need to get more radical than this and just say it's the encompassment of the entire universe right there. Yeah. So.
That's
wild. Wild. I didn't know that was all coming, but here it is, right? I definitely wanted to talk about that.
Like a thief in the night.
Like lightning. Right? Gosh, we could talk about so much more here. But I think more than anything we need to get to, unless there's something in the middle you want to get to, because I want to go straight to eternal progress.
We can head to eternal progress here in a bit, but this is on our way. This is on our way. This is the earthly tabernacle, bottom of page 102, paragraph 188.
Okay.
Actually, right before that, I like how it brings up the life of virginity as a way of purifying the flesh, specifically sort of referring back to his work on virginity. I think is sort of the preparation, the preparing, the building of the earthly tabernacle.
Mm-hmm. And that you can't receive sort of the gift of the heavenly tabernacle if you haven't died to sin.
Right, yeah.
Which happens in mortification. And that, as he specifically says, mortification is an ascetic way of life.
And the two tabernacles seem to be similar to each other in ways.
In some sense identical, I think. Right?
Yeah. So, but then 188. If the interior, which is called the Holy of Holies, is not accessible to the multitude, let us not think that this is at variance with the sequence of what has been perceived. For the truth of reality is truly a holy thing, a holy of holies, and is incomprehensible and inaccessible to the multitude, since it is set in the secret and ineffable areas of the tabernacle of mystery. The apprehension of the realities above comprehension should not be meddled with. One should rather believe that what is sought does exist, not that it lies visible to all, but that it remains in the secret and ineffable areas of the intelligence. Mm-hmm. So I think this is you can tell he can't resist himself to that later section of the eternal progress.
Yeah.
But I love that he does talk about the multitude should not meddle in certain things that are beyond comprehension, because they're going to be it's going to be too tempting to build an idol.
Right.
And
that goes back to what we were talking about last time.
Exactly. It's too tempting. When Moses goes up the mountain, it's going to be too tempting to follow him, but at the foot of the mountain, right? You're going to be like wanting to do what Moses is doing up on top of the mountain, down here at the base.
Yeah.
And
all the irrational animals.
With all the irrational animals, right? And so you're going to be making an image of what's present to you.
Yeah, the golden calf.
The irrational animal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're going to be taking as that which you worship, that which you know, and that's going to be the and so
this is oh man, I think Gregory would be just token on this.
It'd be like a feast of milk and honey. But I think that idea, the idea of recognizing with humility, it's a better way to worship God in saying, I'm not going, because I know myself and I'm, quote, one of the multitude, I'm not going to try to comprehend him in the way that Moses did, because you run the risk of making an idol. And I think what he seems to be suggesting is believe, as he says at the end of what I just quoted, believe that what is sought does exist, not that it lies visible to all, but that it remains in secret and ineffable areas of the intelligence. And I think that humility is just utterly necessary for a spiritual life, and therefore at the various degrees of personal development, personal formation, so that you shouldn't try to think that you can explain the Trinity to anyone, but especially
Yeah.
especially to 12-year-olds or college students, or right. And
Right.
so there's
Right.
this recognition that perhaps the way that you should understand this ineffable reality is not by really trying to move into the darkness to see it, because maybe you're just not capable of. And this could maybe not be through any fault of your own, but
Right.
you're just not
Right.
capable of seeing in the darkness, whatever that means.
Right. Right. But maybe we could maybe even say that once you admit that, you already find yourself surrounded by the cloud in some
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
Because what are you saying? I can't know God. I can't know God like Moses
Yeah.
knows God. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, what is it? It's in your not knowing that you know, right?
Yeah.
It's in your not
Yeah.
seeing that you see.
Yeah.
Now, you still have to do
yeah.
all the stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As
And
it
it
talks about, right? It's only on this path, going back to page 92, right? It's only on this path of the person who's done all the things that Moses has done that he can. It is who then advances to contemplation of the transcendent nature.
Right.
So you have to be purified, right, in a life of ascesis. But that recognition, I'm one of the multitude, I should not do what Moses does, is already making you not one of the multitude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you're saying, I'm not going to meddle with that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder if
That's like John of the Cross taking the life of Moses and like putting it on steroids.
Yeah.
And because he's basically saying the way up the mountain is to say, I can't ascend.
right, because the rungs of the ladder in the picture that he drew are the word
Nada.
right? So I mean that says
Because it does. I mean, it. I think there's a little more he could have done here.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm not like critiquing.
I mean, sure, we can.
Yeah.
We can.
But I mean, I'm not saying he did a poor job, but I think more could have been developed.
Yeah, on this particular idea of the multitude, and yeah,
And the humility of not trying to pursue that which you can't understand, quote unquote, adequately, whatever that means,
Right.
for knowing an ineffable.
right, because knowledge there means something else, right? Than
right.
we normally use it as. Right? Now
Okay.
we could get way into the priestly vestments, which there's some interesting stuff there. I also think there's interesting stuff on the tables of stone, especially on the two different tables of stone, right?
Yeah.
One point that I do want to make before we move forward is 108, 205, paragraph 205, where his anthropology of the oneness of man is imaged in the oneness of Israel, right? So there's this really sort of difficult passage in Exodus, and if you've never read it, I really recommend reading it. Moses comes down from the mountain, hears the drunken singing, right?
Yeah.
And then we hear about the golden calf and Moses throwing the tablets down, but then we kind of forget what happened. And I don't know if I don't remember if it's Charlton Heston's fault that we don't know anything else, because I don't remember what happens in that movie. But it might be that it's his fault, because what happens then is very intriguing, and there's a lot of commentary on this in the Fathers, I know, and I think it needs to be brought up more. Two big things that I want to point out. The first is, and he points this out, what does Moses do with the golden calf? He grinds it into gold dust, pours it, or dissolves it, not dissolves it, but puts it in the water, and then makes the Israelites drink it, right? Which he has some commentary on how sometimes you can see this in a bad way and say you are taking demonic communion here, right? In some sense, right? But he sees this in a good way, and he actually sees it as the error. This is page 107. The error of idolatry utterly disappeared from our life, being swallowed by pious mouths, which through good confession bring about the destruction of material godlessness, of the material of godlessness. And the footnote says something like he's talking about the 4th century after Constantine makes Christianity the religion of the empire. All of a sudden, all these people become Christian, which of course causes monkeys with masks, but at the same time starts to destroy idols, right? And he sees this as very good. And so I think that the drinking of the gold dust of the golden calf is really an an interesting episode that we need to think about more. But the other episode, and the one that I was thinking about more about this anthropology, is the Levitical killing of. I mean, they just go around and they just slaughter of their own people. Right, the Levites, they come and he says, "Get your swords and go kill people."
And does he say whether brother, friend?
Yeah,
like
yeah. He says, he says, yeah, where does he put it? Right. There's no distinction. Death came to everyone they met without preference. 107 at the bottom. No distinction was made between enemy and friend, stranger and neighbor, kinsman and foreigner. And his explanation of this is very interesting, though. He says, 205, this account provides the following useful lesson. Because the Israelites in a body agreed to the evil, and because the whole camp to a man participated in it, they were all without distinction scourged. It is like someone punishing a person caught in that evil act by whipping him. Whatever part of the body he may hit, he tears to shreds with the scourge, knowing that the pain inflicted on that part extends throughout the whole body. The same thing happens when the whole body united in evil is punished. The scourging inflicted on the part chastens the whole. Yeah. And so the next paragraph at the bottom, while not all are struck, the blows upon some chastise all and turn them from evil. So this sort of like, again, this anthropology of the oneness of Israel here, which is a sign of the oneness of humanity, the one Adam. If you look around the world and this is kind of an answer to the problem of evil in some sense, right. Or at least hinting at that. If you look around the world and you say, why did that person die and not me? Gregory wants to say something along the lines of, yeah, I know, we all deserve death, right? Isn't it merciful? And he says something about God's mercy in the midst of this. God is so merciful. Or maybe I'm thinking of Augustine again. God is so merciful in that I am thinking of Augustine. In his Confessions, he talks about all of his loser friends who are still losers after a long time. When he started like changing, he's like, why did I change? Because you're merciful to me, God, right? I deserve to be a loser too. And really, everybody deserves this infliction of punishment. But because of the unity, God inflicts it on some. Because we're all united with each other, that still chastises and brings about a change of heart of those who are living, which is a fascinating way to look at this. Right? I don't know if you had any comments on that, but
no. At the bottom of that page, 108, paragraph 208. I like the it is possible, or for not everyone is named a brother or friend or neighbor in a good sense by Scripture. It is possible for one to be both brother and foreigner, both friend and enemy, both neighbor and opponent. These we perceive as our innermost thoughts, whose life brings about our death, and whose death brings about our life. I think there's this idea of the Are you a neighbor or are you a foreigner? Are you a friend or are you an enemy? And I think he seems to be making this really paradoxical move to say you can be someone can be both.
Yeah.
Right? So
I think he's actually saying we're all both.
Yeah, yeah, and that is maybe what allows for the as you mentioned, like the response to the problem of evil, much more salient that you recognize, sort of the interconnectedness between your life and the other, because maybe it turns out that I myself am also a foreigner.
Right. Right.
I myself am also an enemy.
Yeah.
Right?
In fact, when he talks about the innermost thoughts, he's saying, just look at your innermost thoughts. If your innermost thoughts live, they bring about our death. Right. He's talking about like our own evil tendencies, right? And our own evil actions, or our own evil interior actions, if we can even make that distinction. Whose life brings about our death, and whose death brings about our life, right? Mm-hmm. When I read this, I thought to myself, Solzhenitsyn, call your office. I think this idea that the divide between good and evil goes through every human heart is right there, right? It's right there. So, okay, but we should really get to eternal progress.
Eternal progress. We're not going to get anywhere.
We're not going to get to the end, right? Oh my goodness. Okay. So much here. For those of you who've taken my spiritual theology or who are hoping to sign up for it in the fall, you will recognize themes here of the backside of God, and maybe for the picture on this one.
Yeah, we'll do something special.
We'll do something.
Well,
special.
you're already seeing it. So.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. This is what is time to a turkey.
That's right. What is now? What is now to the past?
Yeah. So look at the picture on the podcast. That is Michelangelo, and his portrayal of Moses' sight. Being the backside of God, right? Which is actually last time I was at the Sistine Chapel before it was crawling with coronavirus was about a year ago, actually, maybe a little more than a year ago, and I remember because I had just taught my spiritual theology class and we'd read stuff like that. Or no, I hadn't actually, but I had thought about that image before, and I looked at, everybody's looking at Adam touching God and the creation scene, right? The very, 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 very famous one, which is also beautiful and has some very interesting things about Adam and Eve and nuptiality and
creating Adam with Eve in the back pocket.
Yeah. And this idea of being as being communion, right? All that stuff is there. So I don't want to denigrate that at all. But I remember being obsessed with the backside of God picture. And this is, I think Michelangelo captures beautifully what Nyssa's trying to say here, right? Because God is, as you can see in that picture, he's moving, right? He's on the move. He's going somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And the only way that you're going to be united to him is run after that rear that you see in front of you, right? And he specifically says, and this is quoted by Rowan Williams in the book that we'll read in spiritual theology, right? He specifically says that it is only the one that sees the back of the leader that is following him. This is page 119. I mean, there's so much in here. It's sopping, right? But he says. He talks about, so Moses sees the back of God, right? And he first brings out that this is what following is at the top of page 119 when he quotes, darn it, stupid endnotes, I don't know. He quotes something that says, follow Yahweh your God, right, as the law commands, right? So he says seeing God's back is actually the sequela Yahweh, right, the following of God, of Yahweh. But he goes deeper into this in 251 because, of course, he's going to identify Jesus Christ with the God of the Old Testament. Right? So when the Lord spoke to Moses, this is 251, but when the Lord who spoke to Moses came to fulfill his own law, he likewise gave a clear explanation to his disciples, laying bare the meaning of what he had previously been said in figure when he said, if anyone wants to be a follower of mine, and not if anyone will go before me. He doesn't say that. And to the one asking about eternal life, he proposes the same thing, for he says, come, follow me. Now, he who follows sees the back. So the next sentence, I think, is one of the best sentences in this whole section, maybe in this whole text. So Moses, who eagerly seeks to behold God, is now taught how he can behold him. To follow God wherever he might lead is to behold him. That And this is getting into what we were just talking about in your Clark class, right? That love and knowledge are not distinct, or I don't know if I want to say distinct, but not separate realities, right? They're not separate realities. To follow God is to love God is to know God, right? To follow God is to behold God, right? He says. His passing by signifies his guiding the one who follows. For someone who does not know the way cannot complete his journey safely in any other way than by following behind his guide. He who leads, then, by his guidance, shows the way to the one following. He who follows will not turn aside from the right way if he always keeps the back of his leader in view. So this is, and of course, this is getting right into the heart of the perpetual change, right? Because what is it that you're doing? You're going further and further into God. And if you're always moving into him or moving behind him, right, you won't see him face to face. In fact, to see him face to face is evil. He says this specifically at the end of this section. I mean, he really left you with a grand slam at the end, right?
This was the humdinger.
Yeah, this was the half court shot when the buzzer's going off, right? He says, anyone who sees God face to face dies. He's not saying, like, we always think of it in sort of an Indiana Jones kind of way, right?
Their skin melts.
Yeah, their skin melts, right? Especially the Nazis.
Especially if you're a Nazi.
So 119 at the bottom, right? He who moves to one side or brings himself to face his guide assumes another direction for himself than the one his guide shows him, right? If your guide is going this way and you face your guide, you're actually facing the other way, right? And so this is why he says, my face is not to be seen, right? If he does so, his course will certainly be in the opposite direction. For good does not look good in the face, but follows it. And what looks virtue in the face then, he says? It's evil, right? So if you're looking at the face of God, guess what you're doing? You are opposing him, right? Yeah. You are the adversary. Yeah. Yeah. If you're looking at the backside of God, then you are following.
And the reason that is because when you look at God in the face, what that presupposes is it presupposes that you are seeing, and so to see a face is to take yourself to know, right? I think this is what's going on. To know God face to face means there's no mystery left, right? It's just completely comprehended. And those that take themselves to do that or want to do that, you're treating God therefore as something that He's not, right? I think one way to think of this is to correctly. So the eternal. I mean, there's a lot that's going on that's really, really mystical in this. The eternal progress section begins. How does someone who Scripture says saw God clearly in such divine appearances face to face as a man speaks with his friend? So so in some ways you have Moses described as in some sense seeing God face to face, but then at the same time at the end, he who sees God face to face shall not live.
Right.
The way that I was thinking about this is, here's how Moses saw God face to face. He saw his backside.
Right.
He saw him as a follower, which is to correctly see God. That's to correctly know God as face to face, if you will, right? The person who says, no, the backside of God isn't good enough. I want to know God as He really is.
Right.
That's the person who's approaching God pridefully, and therefore you take yourself to be capable of, maybe with a little more hard work and more online education, capable of,
definitely not that
of knowing God, right? And so you take yourself to be possibly above God,
right?
So that you can make sense of Him. I can make sense of Him.
I can grasp Him.
I can grasp Him. I can come to know Him and explain Him, and then give this knowledge to other people.
Yeah,
it takes yourself to be kind of this master of this subject matter, and I think that would be someone who says the reason you can't see God face to face and live is because to see something face to face is to not be looking at God, and therefore you're not looking at life itself,
right?
And therefore you're dead.
Yeah. Yeah, so what you're doing is you're not following God, who is life.
You're abandoning Him.
You're not seeing God, who is life.
You're turning to the darkness, which is not the darkness of a bright light.
Right.
Just the void.
Just the flat-out darkness, right?
The void.
Yeah, I mean, he says somewhere in here where he talks about what does it mean that to see God's face you can't live. This is 115, paragraph 234. Scripture does not indicate that this causes the death of those who look. For how would the face of life ever be the cause of death to those who approach it? Yeah. On the contrary, the divine is by its nature life-giving. Yet the characteristic of the divine nature is to transcend all characteristics. This is it right here. Therefore, he who thinks God is something to be known does not have life because he has turned from true being to what he considers by sense perception to have being. Right? And so what does it mean that you can't see God and live? Is that if you claim to see God, you aren't living. that the only way to see God is to say, I don't see him, right? You see by not seeing, right? I don't see his face. I only see his backside. That is him, right?
Yeah.
That is him.
And I remember reading this section maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago or so, and really liking it. Yeah.
Why?
Just this section. It was for something I was wanting to write, but I wrote a bunch and I ended up finishing it.
Okay.
But I read some
in Dropbox somewhere.
Yeah, it's on Dropbox. And then I read some church fathers commenting on Genesis, the fall, where man, Adam and Eve, took from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they described that passage as Adam and Eve coming to take themselves to be prior to a knowledge of the good. So they takes themselves to be capable of grasping and being the master of the good, which would be God. And so they therefore have to stand outside of being. They have to stand outside of the garden to do this, because they can't be say from within and know good and evil. You have to take yourself to be a grasper of good and evil. Takes yourself to be like above it or beyond it, and so that's why it brought about death. Yeah, it brought about death and a separation from the good.
Wow. It's interesting how this idea of following corresponds with his perpetual progress, right? So if you're always following God and he's on the move like Michelangelo shows, right? Then I like how he puts it here. Moses. So. This is 113 here. The good is always attractive, right? This is why, by the way, why we started the podcast with this song, right?
Yeah.
If nothing comes from above to hinder its upward thrust, for the nature of the good attracts to itself those who look to it, the soul rises ever higher and will always make its flight yet higher by its desire of heavenly things, straining ahead for what is still to come, right? There's Philippians 3:13. Made to desire not to abandon the transcendent height by the things already attained, it makes its way upward without ceasing, ever through its prior accomplishments, renewing its intensity for the flight. So once you discover more, it's not that you say, finally I can rest.
Yeah,
right?
or now the pursuit decreases as you're
right. I'm almost there, right?
Yeah.
I've only got I've now my ticker has gone up to 95%, and I only have 5% left. It's not that, right? It's the opposite. It's you realize, first of all, you realize more and more. Whoa, there's way more than I ever thought, and second of all, you desire more and more to go there.
The
right?
intensity,
the intensity,
and the
increases.
interest. I mean, this happens with just understanding anything. Hopefully,
right, exactly, right. I mean, think about how interested was I to read. I don't know, Love in the Postmodern Predicament by David Schindler, before when I was, 20. I was like, I'll read it if they make me. Yeah. And now I'm like reading it for fun.
Yeah. Or maybe how interested were some of you to read Gregory of Nyssa? Maybe at the beginning of the class, somewhat interested. But hopefully, as time went on, you found yourself more and more interested. Maybe not, but maybe more and more interested. Hopefully. With him. I mean, that's just the nature of knowledge.
Right. Because it's the nature of being, right? And you're entering into it. But it keeps going here, right? So that next sentence, activity directed toward virtue causes its capacity to grow through exertion. So your capacity grows as you move forward. This kind of activity alone does not slacken its intensity by the effort, but increases it, right? And so at no time should you stop the ascent or set a limit to it. And I love how he talks about Moses here right at the top of 114. He continually climbed to the step above, never ceased to rise higher, because he always found a step higher than the one he had attained, right? That's beautiful. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. It's like, okay, like you get up to the top of a landing. I'm there. And then you look over to the side. Oh, shoot, it keeps going. But it's not an, oh, shoot, it keeps going, right? It's an, oh, yes, it keeps going. This is so amazing, right? Yeah. There's something beautiful about it.
It's kind of like when you're climbing a mountain and you're only, and if you've never climbed a mountain, you should, and you're not doing it simply to get to the top, but because you like the scenery of being high up. Each step you take, you can say, "Oh, this is better." Yeah. You're like, "Oh, wait, there's a better view up here. Let's go up one more step." Yeah. And you're like, "Oh, but wait, there's even a higher one. There's a better one up here." And you kind of keep pushing yourself up. Yeah. not because you're trying to bring this to an end, but because you find each step is itself better than the last.
Right, and that's why he says in 230 on the same page, right? Although lifted up through such lofty experiences, he is still unsatisfied in his desire for more. He still thirsts. He has to attain as if he had never partaken, not according to his capacity to partake, but according to God's true being. Now, this is a bold move, right? And he says he uses the word boldly in some place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's at the bottom of that page, right? And the bold request which goes up the mountain of desire asks this: to enjoy beauty, not in mirrors and reflections, but face to face. The divine voice granted what was requested in what was denied. I love this, right? Showing in a few words an immeasurable depth of thought. The munificence of God assented to the fulfillment of his desire to see God face to face, but did not promise any cessation or satiety of this desire, right? So the one who looks up to God never ceases in his desire, never ceases, because there's always more. There's always further and deeper to go.
Yeah, and I think. Can we go back to 231, paragraph 231?
Oh, yeah, no, I was going to go back to that. Go for it.
Okay. So I'll just read it.
Did you notice the footnote, 311, though? The end note. The
311 has grassroots. Have you know that's 311, the band 311?
You're really bringing out the 90s here.
I know.
Okay, but the word love there is actually eros. Which the footnote says something like, it is a more intense, to Gregory, it's a more intense form of agape.
Yeah.
Man, this is like pseudo-Dionysius. You are just a thief, man. You're stealing salt from Nyssa.
Yeah. So 231.
Yeah.
Such an experience seems to me to belong to the soul which loves what is beautiful. That's sort of like erotic towards the beautiful.
Right.
This is for all you Platonists out there.
For all you erotic people out there.
Platonists. Hope, and this is interesting. Hope always draws the soul from the beauty which is seen to what is beyond. Mm-hmm. Plotinus.
Yeah.
Always kindles the desire for the hidden through what is constantly perceived. Mm-hmm. So this is the necessity of hope. This is why hope is so essential to the Christian life. It's what makes the pursuit of the ineffable not a misery. Oh shoot, there's still more to go.
Right.
But no, this is actually sort of pushing you beyond beauty, right? It's the hope of what lies beyond beauty,
and a recognition in the human nature that I was born for this.
Yeah. Therefore, the ardent lover of beauty, although receiving what is always visible as an image of what he desires, yet longs to be filled with the very stamp of the archetype.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can just see like he longs to be not just seeing the images of the form, but the form itself.
Yeah.
Right.
C.S. Lewis has this beautiful line in his Weight of Glory, where he says, when we see a beautiful sunset, there's something within us that doesn't just want to linger in seeing it, but wants to enter into it.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a good explanation of what beauty is.
Yeah.
It's this recognition that there's something that I have a desire for the hidden through what is perceived.
Yeah. And in Plato's Symposium, I mean, it's all about erotic love, so it gets a little PG-13, if not a little beyond. But he says the desire for beauty is the desire to actually unite yourself with the beautiful, which is sort of the basis of sexuality. It's the desire to enter into the beautiful for the sake of union, right? And so it's sort of as I said in class, it's a pagan theology of the body.
Yeah, which is why nuptiality is in a real sense one of the most beautiful in a non sort of like generic way of saying beautiful in a transcendental Platonian kind of sense, beautiful in a way that because nuptiality in some real way images being itself almost better than anything else, maybe better than anything else. Right? But we have this desire. I mean, we even in the midst of marriage, you don't just desire your spouse. You in a sense desire to like melt into the person and become one with the person, right? I mean, and this is in a sense it's the beyond that's perceived in sexuality itself.
This is the myth of in Plato's Symposium, Benedict quotes it. The myth
the myth of creation and the splitting.
Who wrote the frogs? I can't believe I'm forgetting the guy's name.
I don't know.
The clouds. Aristophanes.
I was about to say that. Okay.
Aristophanes' myth of the man being split into two,
Yeah.
and he desires to be brought back to his missing half.
Yeah.
So much so that all he wants is to be sewn back together into a unity. Right?
Yeah.
That's what love of the beautiful.
It's funny,
desires,
though, because I think someone who's never read Plato or Ratzinger or Nyssa or Plotinus or any of these dudes would recognize this exact desire.
Yeah.
It's not that I mean, insofar as we've overcome the distortion to grasp and eat for ourselves, but instead to be for the other for the sake of unity, right? Yeah. I think we all recognize this, right? Which is just fabulous, right? But that being said, we should take it out of here.
Okay, let's as we ascend,
Mr. Ford Jackie.
As we ascend, we descend.